So now you've got this report that goes right back to Jesus himself. And I mean, that from 150 years later, for people talking about Jesus, is like us talking about people before Abraham Lincoln, for Pete's sake. That's a long period of time. And to say that the people 150 years after Christ have got the scoop, and Paul and James and Peter do not. And again, these fellows are testifying to what Paul says there. The reason that's a creedal statement is because that language that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians, he doesn't use some of those words in other places. So it's the scholars can see that. Talk to me about that.
Well, that's very important. We look for these kind of embedded nuggets for early tradition that predates the writer. Tradition that the writer appeals to because it's common ground. Keep that in mind. Paul has a problem with what some Christians at Corinth are saying about the resurrection. So he appeals to not just common ground, but ground that precedes Paul himself and his theological developments and reflections. And so this is very important pre-Pauline common ground. And he tells the Corinthians, be reminded of this and keep in mind what this is teaching. That I find, I agree with Gary, that is very significant. It's very old, very primitive. And to overthrow that with traditions that developed 100, 150 years later, I find that a very, very dubious way to proceed.
John, if I could just jump in here for a second. I think I don't want to be misunderstood as saying two things here. Not only is this material early and eyewitness. Everyone says, at least for Paul, it's eyewitness. Then we have Paul's comments about three other eyewitnesses. So at least we have Paul's comment on them. But the other thing is the Tabor response, that there's two early traditions, and James does not agree with Paul. I just want to say, the same material that says this is early says there were not two traditions. Now somebody might say, well, wait a minute, didn't Paul and Peter have an argument? Yes, they did. It's Galatians 2, the second half of the same chapter. But it's over a periphery item. It's over fellowship with Gentiles. They do not discuss the sinner. They're in agreement there. They added nothing to me, Galatians 2:6. They gave us the right hand of fellowship, Galatians 2:9 and 10. The earliest leaders are together on this. And to overthrow that is going to be very difficult in light of the authorship of Galatians, Paul being behind it, and Paul being, a rabbinic source, a good thinking mind who gives us his name and place on this. It's a